is my 100th MistareFusion video. Yay! Thanks to a dialogue in the comments I had last week with AJ Rax Ultima. I hope I'm saying that right. I'd like to continue my discussion on God's story, but from the opposite perspective. I feel up to now I've done everything I can to try to justify why and when God does what he does to give him the benefit of the doubt, but that might make it unclear why I feel so strongly that he should have been more serious about ending his own life. I'm not saying he should have died, and I'm glad things worked out without him dying, but it does come across a bit like, oh, I'm so distraught over the horrors I've brought to the world, to the people I swore to protect. I must do whatever it takes to fix this. Unless it inconveniences me, then I'm just not really sure if I want to do that. After a while, it just comes across as a bit disingenuous. It's certainly not on purpose. I think it's largely due to Toriyama having made this up as he went along, and once God's story finally does get going, he seems to genuinely consider it. But then you retroactively look at everything else, and it starts to look a little weird. Here's a guy whose sole job it is to watch over the Earth. Its biggest threat up to this point is Piccolo. And he's a pretty big threat, not to mention God's undeniable personal responsibility. God alone possesses the ability to immediately neutralize him forever. And yet, Piccolo has been able to run amok and slaughter people on 3 separate occasions. Forget training people, forget sealing Piccolo away. At this point, getting someone to kill him should be God's first resort, not his last. It doesn't surprise me that a lot of fans I've talked to see him as a completely worthless guy who sucks at his job because of stuff like this. I wouldn't go that far, but it is worth questioning his actions, especially because a god in this context is very ill-defined. Now, I don't want the mystical to be completely spelled out, but when a good chunk of the drama is centered around this guy, it helps to know what's at stake for him, what his obligations and responsibilities are, and what powers and limitations that gives him in this situation. Hey, dying sucks, but what does dying even mean for God? I'm beginning to go off on a bit of a tangent here, one that's better served for the next arc, but my point is, God works in mysterious ways can only take you so far before you realize it's just an excuse for sloppy storytelling. The characters begin to grow or solidify here largely into what they're known for in modern times. This is where Goku introduces his honor before reason type of mentality, as well as sparing villains rather than finishing them off. Some have speculated that this change is due to his training with God teaching him the value of life. Nothing in the story really hints at this, but I don't think it's an unreasonable assumption to make. Then again, while we have seen instances of Goku killing before, I don't think he's necessarily as bloodthirsty as a child as I hear some suggest. Due to the cartoony nature of early Dragon Ball, it's hard to tell who's dead and who's just knocked out and what the real threshold of human endurance is. On the other hand, this also introduces the idea of Goku sparing a villain at least partly because of his own desire to fight him again, when killing the psychopath might be the more reasonable option. So it's a bit of a mix. Is Goku becoming more merciful or more selfish? Or both? Also, it's just fun to see Goku tackle adult issues like marriage in his own Goku way. Ma Jr., I feel, is a step up from the previous Piccolo, but I think that's only because of the foundation laid by his predecessor. He definitely looks cooler, and I think his motivations being more personal works better. My favorite moment is when he declares that Piccolo Daimao has been avenged by Piccolo Daimao. He has a lot of creative techniques, and having him perch on the roof for most of the tournament establishes his persona very well. He's more patient and calculating. That said, once he actually becomes active, he still just feels like the standard cackling villain who boasts about how great it is being evil. But since his Piccolo gets to stick around, maybe he'll get better. Tenshinhan is fully moved from the smirking, arrogant braggart he was introduced as into the group's resident stoic. He's not social, he's not happy, but he's in the loop. In fact, Tenshinhan feels more like Goku's second in command in this arc than anyone else. He's the one Goku confides in about Ma Jr.'s Mazoku pedigree, he's the only one of the core cast besides Goku to make it to the semifinals, he's the one Goku tosses the bottle to, he's the one who gets everyone to safety, he's the one who reasons with God, he's the one God asks to kill him. Again, I am disappointed his Tao Pai Pai plot was resolved so easily, but he does get to appear as a very effective and very distinct member of the group this time around. Yamcha and Kuririn both really fall into the sidekick role here. They almost seem superfluous in a way, and considering due to death and broken leg that neither of them had much of a role in the last arc, I think it's fair to say that their continuing relevance is very much in question at this point. Still, they are given a modicum of respect in how they're handled, especially in their more social scenes, and the few fights they have show off their new skills and overall progress as students and martial artists quite well. Even Oolong and Lunch get tiny moments outside of the norm. Once again, I like how Oolong was the first to figure out Chi-Chi's identity, and I love the moment when Lunch just up and kicks God into the hole Tenshinhan made. That's seriously one of my favorite moments in the series. Of course, this arc marks the last appearance of Lunch within the series itself. I've already made my feelings on the character clear, so I don't exactly think it's much of a loss. That said, she is a main character and she deserved better than just being tossed out. I did mistakenly say back then that she was the character Toriyama forgot about, which isn't exactly true. Funnily enough, I ended up cutting a part out of that script where I compared her to Lyman from the Garfield comic strip. Lyman, in case you didn't know, was Odie's owner and someone for John to talk to until Jim Davis decided he was superfluous and just phased him out. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case here too, but since she is mentioned in the next arc, I'll save that for there. I will say, though, I've never been a fan of the whole Lunch-Tenshinhan pairing. I'm not necessarily against it, but since they almost literally never even have so much as a word to say to each other, there's absolutely nothing for me to get invested in. So, do I think Lunch and Tenshinhan ever end up together? Speaking of which, Bluma gets very little to do in this arc, as is expected in a tournament arc, but Toriyama does use her in one unexpected way. At the beginning of the arc, everyone is shocked at Goku's transformation, but she's the only one who, well, swoons over him at a few moments, to the point that Oolong even calls her out over it. I know there's a section of the fandom that ships Goku and Bluma. Hell, there's a section of every fandom that ships every pairing conceivable. After all, they're the first two characters introduced in the entire franchise and serve as foils to each other in the first arc. Bluma is by far the most prominent female character in Dragon Ball. She's also the one who first introduces Goku to the outside world. The only thing having prevented a pairing, besides the fact that she's in a relationship, up to this point has been the age gap, which no longer seems as prominent at this point. So I can certainly see the appeal of such a pairing, but it goes no farther than these couple of teases, one of which, where she thinks to herself that Sun-kun has gone from a shrimp to a mountain, is immediately followed up by a reminder that he's getting married. So I'm not really sure what Toriyama was doing. Are they red herrings to throw the reader off before Chi-Chi shows up? Or maybe I'm misreading them entirely. Maybe he's not trying to pair them up at all, but rather build up how awesome his new adult Goku is, given that he was worried about that at the time. And then, of course, there's poor Chaozu, who barely says anything, barely does anything, and is only brought back in a seeming afterthought with a very crude drawing as if Toriyama suddenly remembered, oh yeah, he exists! Maybe he saw the movie. The funny thing is, though, that so many of his drawings around this time seem to depict Goku, Kuririn, Yamcha, Tenshinhan, and Chaozu as the main 5 characters. And in fact, aside from lacking a female member, had he actually used them more, they fairly closely fit the 5-man band moniker from TV tropes, used to describe the character types associated with 5-member teams that so frequently show up in fiction. Goku is obviously the leader, Kuririn is the lancer, as he's the hero's best friend and rival. Tenshinhan is the big guy who's tough and has a no-nonsense attitude, although given his role in this arc, he could fit as the Lancer as well. Yamcha's the smart guy, the one with all the exposition, who makes all the plans. And Chaozu is the chick. Or he probably would be if he actually had a personality. Now, I've received several comments lately asking why it is I'm even making a big deal out of Chaozu, that he was never considered a main character to begin with, that he's basically Puar to Tenshinhan's Yamcha. And to that I have to say, you guys have been here from the beginning, right? Because, Puar was considered a main character too. In fact, he was one of the 5 original main characters. Yes, he was poorly utilized and underdeveloped just like Chaozu, but that doesn't change how either of them was presented in their respective heydays. And since I gave the early story arcs hell for screwing over Puar, of course I'm going to do the same for Chaozu, because part of what makes an arc good or bad is how well it utilizes its cast. But while I've lobbed my fair share of criticisms toward the story and characters of this arc, I love the way it makes me feel when I'm reading it. It makes me happy. Everyone feels very close. In fact, the scenes where Goku, Yamcha, and Kuririn are just talking, whether about their uniforms, or Senzu, or standing up for the Muten Roshi even though they're no longer technically his students anymore, are probably some of my favorite scenes in the series. They just feel real. They feel like people who really know each other, and in a series that is often constant fighting, I love moments like these. But I believe in this group. I like this group. I feel they've all come a long way together. I love that the story comes full circle on itself in regards to God and the Dragon Balls, and for the first time the story reaches a conclusion. That's not to say the series ended. It says right there it's not going to, and it comes back the very next week like any other chapter. But every other arc had led into or set up the next one. This is the first time in the series that everything is resolved. Even the title page for chapter 194 calls back to the very beginning. The series really could have ended right here, and I think it would have been a great ending. As it stands, it feels rather bittersweet. The series is going to continue on to great things after this and expand and redefine itself in many ways and become exponentially more popular. But it's never going to be the same as it's been up to this point. And part of me wonders if Toriyama made this arc so final as a way to say goodbye. To the tournament, to these characters, many of whom are going to have greatly reduced roles from here on out, to a lot of the fantasy and mystical elements. I'm probably looking far too much into this, but I wouldn't mind believing it to be true. Finally, I have to say I love the art in this arc. In my opinion, this is around the time Dragon Ball looks its absolute best. I love all the character designs, and I don't think Goku ever looks cooler than he does here. He looks matured, but still youthful. He's quite a bit shorter still than Yamcha and Ten Shinhan. He's muscular, but not ridiculously roided out like he'd become later on. The style is still pleasingly rounded. And of course, I can't not mention this awesome panel right here, which I loved enough to use as the thumbnail for the last video. That's hilarious and awesome. Wow. Maybe it's my nostalgia and how similar they look to the point in the series in which I was introduced to these characters, but I like this a lot. So here's the truth. I've reached a milestone, and I'm sad to see it pass. It's been great having Dragon Ball Dissection so immersed in the, quite frankly, underappreciated early parts of the series for the past 3 years, because whatever exposure I can give it, it deserves. It's not that I'm not totally looking forward to moving ahead, but the later parts of the series don't really need my help in terms of being recognized. But for this arc, it's time to put it to bed. While I find all the tournament arcs relatively comparable in quality, the 23rd Tenkaichi Budoukai arc is not my favorite tournament arc. It's greatly buoyed up by containing some of my favorite moments and character interactions, but the story feels crowded and doesn't really fit the tournament format. The end of the final fight feels rather anticlimactic, especially compared to the endings of the previous tournaments. I mean, what, he just bumps into him? Yawn. Some of the god elements continue to be sloppily integrated, and Piccolo still doesn't really gel for me as a villain. But it's a heck of a lot of fun, and I'd say it's at least twice as good as the Piccolo Daimo arc, so I award it a 4 out of 10. That may seem rather low, but remember that these aren't objective scores, just scores in comparison to the other arcs. So it's more that I feel other arcs are better, not that I feel this one is bad. It's really only the bottom 2 or 3 I have significant problems with. Well, Dragon Ball Dissection December for 2014 has come to a close. Thank you all for sticking with MistareFusion for another year. Now that we've finished what I consider the second era, I'm probably going to take a break from Dragon Ball for a little while, but next time we return to the beginning of this era with our TV look at the 22nd Tenkaichi Budoukai arc. See you there!